Listen to this for a moment. A chainsaw somewhere in a forest, revving up, cutting, idling. Except there is no chainsaw. There is no machine within kilometers. What you are hearing is a bird standing on a small mound of earth on the floor of an Australian forest, producing that sound out of its own throat with such precision that a sound engineer, shown only the recording, would swear a saw was running. And here is the part that should stop you. The part that almost nobody who has shared that famous clip actually understands. The chainsaw is the least impressive thing this bird can do. It is a parlor trick compared to what is really going on inside that animal. Because the bird you are listening to does not just copy sounds. It runs one of the most sophisticated vocal systems on the planet. It lies to predators with it. It inherits its songs from its grandfathers, and it carries in its repertoire the calls of species that no longer exist where it lives. This is the superb lyrebird, and by the end of this, the chainsaw will be the part you have forgotten. You have almost certainly seen the bird before, or at least heard it, in the David Attenborough clip from the late 1990s that has been watched and reshared more than almost any piece of natural history footage ever made. The chainsaw, the camera shutters, the car alarm. It is rightly famous, but it is 30 seconds long, and the lyrebird deserves rather more than 30 seconds, because what that clip cannot tell you is what the bird actually is. So let's meet it properly. The superb lyrebird, Menura novae hollandii, lives on the forest floors of southeastern Australia, and it is, against all expectation, one of the largest songbirds on Earth, with a body around 80 centimeters to a meter long and a weight close to a kilogram. That alone is strange. We picture songbirds as small things, and this is a heavy ground-dwelling giant that scratches through the leaf litter on powerful legs, flies clumsily and rarely, and would rather run or glide downhill than take to the air. It can live for up to 30 years, extraordinarily long for a bird its size, and that longevity matters more than it first appears, because it gives the bird decades in which to listen, to learn, and to accumulate sounds. And the male, when the time comes to perform, builds himself a raised mound of earth, a stage, and from it he unfurls the long, filigreed tail that gives the family its name, the spread feathers forming the shape of a Greek lyre, a shimmering silver curtain he throws forward over his own head as he sings and dances on his stage. But the tail, spectacular as it is the part everyone notices, and it leads people to misread the bird entirely, to file it away as a kind of feathered showman, a natural comedian that copy sounds for amusement. It is nothing of the sort. The mimicry is not a quirk or a game. It is the central function around which much of the animal's biology is organized. The thing that makes the lyrebird one of the most remarkable animals alive is happening in its throat, and to understand it, you have to understand how a bird makes sound at all. Because a bird does not sing the way you do. You have a larynx, a voice box high in your throat with vocal cords that vibrate as air passes over them. A bird has no vocal cords. Instead, it has an organ found nowhere else in nature, called the syrinx, and it sits much deeper, right at the bottom of the windpipe, at the exact point where the single trachea splits into the two bronchi that run to the two lungs. And that location is everything, because it means a bird does not have one sound source. It has two, one sitting at the entrance to each lung, and in many birds, those two sources can be controlled separately. The lyrebird is the supreme master of that control. It can drive each side of its syrinx independently, producing two entirely different sounds at the very same instant, two different melodies, two different timbres, two different rhythms, layered together into a single performance. Stop and try to grasp how alien that is. You cannot do it. No human can. The closest analogy is imagining that you could sing one complete song with the left half of your throat and a totally different song with the right half simultaneously, neither one drifting off key. That is not a metaphor for the lyrebird. That is simply how it sings. And once you know that the instrument has two independent voices, every impossible thing the bird does afterwards stops being magic and starts being mechanism. The two voices are the foundation. Everything else is built on top of them. It is worth pausing on just how fine that control has to be. To copy a sound is not simply to make a similar noise, it is to reverse engineer, on the fly, exactly which muscles to tense, and how much air to push, and how to divide the work between the two halves of the syrinx, and then to do it again, perfectly, on demand. The lyrebird does this with thousands of distinct sounds, switching between them in fractions of a second. It is one of the most demanding feats of motor control known in any animal. So what does it do with that instrument? It copies, and it copies with a fidelity that has to be measured to be believed. When scientists record a lyrebird imitating another animal and lay the two sounds side by side as spectrograms, the visual fingerprints of sound, the match is uncanny. Researchers who have studied lyrebird mimicry in close detail, among them Anastasia Dalziel and Justin Welbergen, have shown that the bird reproduces not just the rough shape of a sound, but its frequency, its volume, its timing, and its fine harmonic texture, with deviations so small they are difficult to detect. And this is where the word imitation starts to feel too weak. When a lyrebird copies the call of a kookaburra, another Australian bird, it does not sound like a kookaburra. It sounds identical to one. When it copies a dog, it does not produce a generic bark. It reproduces the specific bark of a specific individual dog it has heard. It is not learning categories of sound. It is learning particular sounds, particular individuals, and storing them with that same forensic precision. A bird that has heard one neighbor's distinctive call and another's can keep the two apart and reproduce each on its own, much the way you might recognize and mimic the specific voices of two different friends rather than some generic idea of a human voice. And it stores a great many of them. A dominant male's display is not an occasional flourish of mimicry. Somewhere around 4/5 of his entire song is imitation of other species and ambient sounds, with only the remaining fifth being the lyrebird's own native vocalizations. He may hold 25 or 30 distinct, complex imitations in his memory and cycle through them across a single performance that can run for 20 or 30 minutes without pause, the transition seamless, one sound flowing into the next. To put that in perspective, a canary commands a handful of songs, a blackbird perhaps a dozen. The lyrebird operates an order of magnitude beyond any other songbird we know, and it does so, remarkably, without ever seeming to tire. A human singer pushing through a 30-minute set would need to pace themselves, to breathe, to rest the voice. The lyrebird simply keeps going, pouring out one flawless imitation after another, layering its two voices, holding its enormous catalog in working memory and drawing from it at will, the way a master musician improvises from a lifetime of learned pieces. Which brings us finally to the sounds the title promised, the ones that made the bird famous, because now you can understand why they are possible. The lyrebird has been documented imitating chainsaws and the click and motor whir of camera shutters, the two sounds from the Attenborough clip. Tellingly, the most celebrated of these mechanical imitations come from birds that have had close contact with the human world. And the camera shutter is almost too perfect a detail, because it means the bird is reproducing the sound of the very act of being photographed, copying the machines of the people who came to record it. It has been recorded imitating car alarms near rural roads, the individual barks of particular dogs, and even human voices. The most famous case of all was a lyrebird named Chook, raised among people at Adelaide Zoo, who could reproduce his keeper's voice, the bang of a hammer, the buzz of a saw, and the opening notes of a tune. What unites all of these, the bird calls and the machines and the human voices alike, is that the lyrebird treats them as raw material without judgment. It does not distinguish between a natural sound worth copying and an artificial one. It simply hears, remembers, and reproduces, which is exactly why the sounds of the human world have crept so thoroughly into its repertoire. And the question that matters, the one that turns a novelty act into biology, is why? Why would a bird pour this much cognitive machinery into collecting sounds? The answer is the females are listening, and they are judging. A male lyrebird mimics to be chosen. Females select their mates based on the richness and accuracy and variety of the male's repertoire, which means that every sound he has ever captured is, in effect, a line on a resume he is performing for a mate. A larger, sharper, more diverse repertoire signals a better memory, a sharper mind, more years of learning, a fitter partner. The chainsaw is not a joke. It is courtship. Sexual selection has, over countless generations, sculpted the most powerful vocal learning in the bird world out of nothing more than the question of who gets to reproduce. For a long time, that was where the story ended. The male as virtuoso, the female as silent audience. And then, in 2021, that picture was quietly turned inside out. For decades, it had been assumed that only male lyrebirds imitate because only males perform those grand displays. But research published that year by Fiona Backhouse and her colleagues revealed that the females mimic too, and they do it for a reason no one had imagined. The female does not mimic to show off, she mimics to deceive. When a predator approaches her nest, she can reproduce the sound of a mobbing flock, the specific chorus of alarm calls that small birds make when they have ganged together to harass and drive off a hunter. To the predator at the nest, it sounds as though a whole mob of birds has already spotted a threat and is converging on the area. And so the predator, believing it has been detected or that danger is already present, thinks better of it and leaves. The female lyrebird is not singing. She is broadcasting a fabricated emergency, a sound designed not to express anything true, but to manipulate the behavior of another animal, and it works. She appears to deploy it at the most dangerous moments, when there are eggs or chicks in the nest and a predator is closing in, turning her vocal gift into a last line of defense. That is a startling thing for a bird to do. It means the lyrebird's mimicry is not merely an ornament for attracting mates. It is a flexible tool used by both sexes for courtship in one case and for calculated deception in the other. This is not a copycat. This is an animal using sound as a strategy. And then there is the last layer, the one that lifts the lyrebird out of the category of impressive animals and into something closer to profound. Because lyrebirds do not only learn their sounds from the environment, they learn them from each other. A young male spends years listening to the older males around him and absorbing their repertoires, which means the imitations are passed down, generation to generation, like songs handed from teacher to student. And because of that, different populations of lyrebirds in different parts of Australia sing differently. A lyrebird in Victoria carries a repertoire distinct from a lyrebird in Queensland. And the difference is not simply because they live among different sounds. It is because their forebears sang different things, and those things were inherited. Cut a young lyrebird off from the older males of its region, and it grows up singing a different, poorer song. Raise it among a particular community, and it absorbs that community's particular repertoire. The sounds are not written into its genes. They are taught. That is the rigorous definition of culture. Learned behavior transmitted across generations, varying from one community to another. It is the same phenomenon we recognize in human musical traditions or in the regional songs of Wales. The lyrebird has its own folk music, its own local traditions handed down the generations in the forest. And this is where the final, quietly devastating fact arrives. In some forests, lyrebirds have been recorded imitating the calls of bird species that no longer live there, species that have moved away or vanished from the region entirely. The birds are still singing them faithfully, having learned them from elders who learned them from elders, long after the originals fell silent. Their songs have become recordings of a soundscape that no longer exists, an acoustic memory of a forest that is gone, preserved in the throat of an animal that never knew the difference. Think about what that means as a record. Long after a species has gone quiet in a particular forest, its voice can persist there, carried forward by a completely different animal, passed from one generation of lyrebirds to the next like an heirloom whose original owner is long forgotten. The forest keeps singing sounds the forest no longer makes. And that is what the lyrebird really is. Once you see past the chainsaw, it is not a mimic, it is an archive. Its song contains the forest it lives in and the forest that used to be there. It contains the other animals it shares the trees with, and the humans who came to photograph it, and the predators it has learned to deceive, and the grandfathers it never met whose music it still sings. When a lyrebird performs on its little mound of earth, it is not showing off a clever trick. It is reciting, in a single unbroken voice split impossibly in two, the entire sonic history of the place it belongs to. There is a second species, the Albert's lyrebird, rarer and quieter and clinging to a small pocket of forest on the Queensland border, already listed as near threatened, carrying its own inherited songs that almost no one ever hears, a quieter archive that could close for good while most of the world never even learns. It existed. And that is the thought worth holding on to. Across this strange continent, we have followed predators that crushed bone, giants that ruled the land and then turned to dust, and a great lizard that may or may not still be out there in the scrub, kings that left no heirs and survive now only as bones and as silence. The lyrebird is the other side of all of it. It is the one that remembers. In its throat, the vanished are still singing, and as long as the bird endures, so does the sound of everything that came before it. Australia is a land of creatures that should not be possible, some of them long gone and some of them still here. In the song of one brown bird on a mound of earth at dawn, you can hear all of them at once.